My name is Willa Sinclair. I'm 35 years old. I was written out of my father's will the year I reported him for what he did to me at 13. My siblings called me a liar for 22 years. At his funeral, a social worker I'd never met sat down next to me and placed a sealed envelope in my hands. Inside was my mother's journal, from the year she died. My mom had known everything, every single thing, and she had named me the sole beneficiary of a separate estate she created in 1998, an estate my dad kept hidden from all of us for 27 years. My siblings didn't know it existed. They do now. And what happened in that lawyer's office when the truth came out is something none of us will ever forget. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Now let me take you back to September, the Tuesday afternoon my brother called to tell me our father was dead. The call came at 2:47 on a Tuesday, between a depreciation schedule and a cup of coffee that had gone cold. I was at my desk, third floor, corner cubicle at Meriden and Hale, a mid-size accounting firm 400 miles from the town I grew up in. September, end of quarter. The kind of week where you eat lunch at your desk and forget the sun exists. My phone buzzed. Keith, my oldest brother. We hadn't spoken in 3 years, and even that had been a voicemail I didn't return. I picked up anyway. "Dad's dead," Keith said. "No hello, no how are you?" "Stroke, this morning." I sat there with the phone in my hand and waited to feel something. Nothing came, and then I felt guilty about the nothing. That was the first feeling. "Funeral's Saturday," Keith said. "You can come if you want. You can come if you want." Like it was a barbecue. Like I was a neighbor being told the details as a courtesy. "Okay," I said. "Okay what?" "Okay, I heard you." He waited for more. I didn't give it. Keith had always confused silence with weakness. In my experience, it's the opposite. Silence is what's left when you've already said everything that matters and no one listened. He hung up before I could decide whether to say anything else. He'd always been good at having the last word. But this time, he didn't know. Someone else had already had it. Let me tell you something about grief. It doesn't always show up when it's supposed to. Sometimes it sends an understudy. Mine arrived that night at 11 p.m. in the form of a question I couldn't stop asking. Why did I feel relieved? And what did that say about me? I didn't know it yet, but the phone call was the smallest thing that would happen to me that week. I had 400 miles and 3 days to decide whether to attend the funeral of a man who had removed me from his life, like a line item on a tax return. My apartment was quiet. Small one-bedroom, clean counters, a shelf of books I actually read. Margin, my cat, a gray tabby with trust issues and a crooked ear, was asleep on the radiator. I'd named her after the place where the important notes go. Most people didn't get the joke. That was fine. I stood in the kitchen and looked at what I'd built. 9 years at Meriden and Hale, a decent salary, a few good friends, a therapist I kept meaning to call but never did, a life that was small and quiet and entirely mine. I opened the bottom drawer of my dresser. Underneath a stack of old tax returns. Yes, I keep them. Yes, I know. There was a photograph. My mother holding me at the lake, 1993. I was 3. She was smiling in a way that looked like it cost her something. I hadn't been home since I was 18. The last time I stood in that house, I had a backpack over one shoulder, and no one came to the door to watch me leave. That was fine too. I'd gotten used to doors closing behind me. But I'd made a promise once. I was 13, and I'd written it in a letter no one ever saw. I promised my mother I would always be the kind of woman who finished things, who showed up even when it was hard, who didn't become the person they said I was. I didn't go back for him. I went back for her. I requested 2 days off. My boss asked if I needed more. I said 2 was plenty. He didn't know my family. 2 days was generous. I packed a black dress and a pair of flat shoes. I did not pack expectations. The town hadn't changed. That was the problem. 400 miles of highway, 2 gas station coffees, and then, there it was. Same water tower, same blinking yellow light at the intersection of Main and Oak. Same Presbyterian church with the sign out front that always had a Bible verse misspelled. I drove past the high school where I'd sat in the guidance counselor's office at 13 and said the words out loud for the first time. Past the auto parts store my father had managed for 26 years, where everyone called him Jerry and thought he was a hell of a guy. Past the gas station where Keith used to work summers. In my experience, small towns don't forget. They just decide which version of the truth is most convenient. I checked into the Pinecrest Motor Lodge on Route 9, 3 miles outside town. I paid cash. The woman at the front desk, mid-50s, perm, reading glasses on a chain, looked at my ID and then looked at me. "Sinclair," she said. "You Gerald's daughter?" "I'm Elaine's daughter," I said. She didn't know what to do with that, so she handed me a key card and told me checkout was at 11. The room was what you'd expect. Thin carpet, a painting of a duck, a window that looked out onto the parking lot. I sat on the edge of the bed with my coat still on and listened to the ice machine hum through the wall. 4 miles away, the house I grew up in was full of people making casseroles and telling stories about my father. My name would not come up. They'd scrubbed me from the narrative years ago, removed my photos from the wall, skipped my name at holidays. I was the daughter who didn't exist. I turned off the light and lay in the dark, 4 miles from that house and a lifetime away from the girl who'd left it. The church smelled like lilies and furniture polish. I've never trusted lilies since. Saturday morning, 9 o'clock. Grace Methodist, the same church where my parents were married, where my mother's funeral was held, and now where my father lay in a closed casket surrounded by flower arrangements from people who thought they knew him. About 60 people. I came early and sat in the last pew, near the door. Old habit. Always know where the exit is. Keith arrived in a dark suit that didn't quite fit, walking the way eldest sons walk at funerals. Like they're already in charge. He saw me. One nod. The kind you'd give a coworker you'd passed in the hallway. Bryn came next, in black, clutching tissues before she needed them. She looked at me across the church, held my gaze for half a second, then turned and put her arm around her husband. Todd entered last. 32, still moving through rooms like he wasn't sure he belonged in them. He spotted me. For one moment, he took a step toward my pew. Then Keith caught his arm and steered him forward. Bryn delivered the eulogy. "Our father was a man of principle," she said. "He believed in family above all else." She said it with her chin up and her voice steady, and I thought, "You believe that. You actually believe that." I sat still and let the words wash over me like weather. People filed past the casket. Some of them glanced at me. An old neighbor whispered something to the woman beside her. I didn't strain to hear it. I already knew the script. She showed up. Can you believe it? After everything. Gerald Sinclair looked smaller in the casket than I remembered. They always do. Keith murmured something to Bryn as I stood to leave, just loud enough to carry. Always had a talent for making things about herself. And then, as I reached the door, a woman I had never seen before sat down next to me. She didn't introduce herself the way most people do. She said my name like she'd been practicing it. "You're Willa." Not a question, a statement. She was maybe 64, 65. Silver hair pinned back, glasses, hands that trembled slightly when she set them on the pew between us. She wore a blue cardigan that had been ironed. "Your mother asked me to find you," she said quietly. Everything in the room went very far away. "My name is Margaret Calloway. I was a social worker in this county for 31 years. I knew your mother. She came to me in October of 1998. She paused. 2 weeks before she passed. I couldn't speak. My jaw was doing something involuntary. My hands gripped the edge of the pew. Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a large envelope. Thick, sealed. On the front, in handwriting, I recognized the way you recognize your own heartbeat. My mother's careful Catholic school cursive. For my Willa. When it's safe. Her instructions were clear, Margaret said. When Gerald Sinclair dies, give this to Willa. Only Willa. She placed the envelope in my hands. I've carried this for 27 years. I'm glad it's over. She stood. She didn't ask if I had questions. She didn't explain further. She smoothed her cardigan, nodded once, and walked out of the church without looking back. I sat there holding the envelope with both hands. It was heavier than it should have been. Or maybe that was me. If you've ever loved someone who made you feel crazy for remembering what happened, you know the math I'm talking about. You spend years wondering if you invented the whole thing. And then someone hands you proof that you didn't. I didn't open it there. Some things you don't open in a room full of people who spent 22 years calling you a liar. I didn't know it yet, but that envelope was heavier than anything my father had ever left behind. The house had been repainted twice since I'd left, but the floor still creaked in the same places, like it remembered who had walked there. I went to the wake because that is what you do. You show up, you stand near the coffee, you let people say things at you. The living room was crowded. Casserole dishes lined the kitchen counter. Someone had put out paper napkins with crosses on them. Bryn found me by the sink. You didn't have to come, you know. Nobody expected you. She said it in the same tone she used on her second graders, gentle, instructive, absolutely certain of the hierarchy. I know, I said. Keith crossed the kitchen with a plate of food he wasn't eating. Lawyer's reading the will next Thursday. You're not in it, just so you know. I know that too, I said. He waited for me to flinch. I didn't. People think being left out of a will is the worst thing a parent can do. They've never been in a family where the will is a weapon. My father wrote me out in 2003 in front of my siblings, the week after I told the truth. This is what happens, he said, when you betray your family. He meant, this is what happens when you stop being quiet. Todd drifted over with a glass of water. Here, he said, handing it to me. Then, lower. I'm sorry about everything. Keith glanced over. Todd stepped back like a dog that had been caught on the furniture. I looked around the room. Every wall, every shelf. The family photos above the fireplace had been rearranged years ago. Every picture of me, gone, like I'd been erased with a sponge. Keith said I wasn't in the will. He said it like it was a threat. He didn't know it was a relief. Thank you for being here with me. If you're enjoying this story, would you like and subscribe? Think of it as pulling up a chair. You're welcome at this table. I sat on the edge of the motel bed and held the envelope the way you hold something that might change your life, which is to say, carefully, and with both hands. The ice machine hummed through the wall. Outside, a truck pulled out of the lot and its headlights swept across the ceiling. I reached for the scissors in my toiletry bag and cut the envelope open along the top. Clean, precise. The way I open everything. I'm an accountant. Even my crises are organized. 3 items inside. First, a journal. Leather-bound, dark brown, the size of a paperback novel. My mother's handwriting on the first page. I recognized it immediately. The same hand that had written my name on lunch bags and permission slips 30 years ago. Second, a document. Legal-sized, certified copy. The heading read, Irrevocable Trust of Elaine Harper Sinclair, established August 15, 1998. Trustee, Lakeview Fiduciary Services. Sole beneficiary, Willa Elaine Sinclair. Trust assets, lakefront property, Lot 7, Cedar Lake, and $340,000 in cash from grantor's separate inheritance. Third, a letter of instruction from my mother to Margaret Calloway, notarized, dated October 1st, 1998, 12 days before she died. I opened the journal to the first page. August 12th, 1998. I don't have much time left. The doctor says weeks, maybe 2 months. I need to write this down because I won't be here to say it. I read that line 4 times. Then I set the journal on the bed and pressed my palms flat against my knees until they stopped shaking. $340,000. A house by the lake. A trust set up 2 months before she died. Funded with her own inheritance. Separate property. My father was never named. Anywhere. My mother had known. She had known everything. And she had done the only thing a dying woman could do. She had planned for a future she would never see. And that was only the first page. My mother's handwriting was small and precise, the kind of penmanship they taught in Catholic schools in the 1970s. Every letter deliberate. Every word chosen. I read 3 more entries that night with my shoes still on and the bedside lamp throwing a yellow circle across the bedspread. August 20th, 1998. Willa doesn't sit on his lap anymore. She used to. She doesn't flinch exactly. It's more like she goes somewhere else. I know that look. I wore it myself 30 years ago in my own father's house. I stopped breathing for a moment. Then I turned the page. September 1st, 1998. I drove to Edgewater today. Told Gerald it was the oncologist. He didn't ask which one. I met with an estate attorney named Richard Pruitt. I asked him about irrevocable trusts. He explained them in plain English. I liked him. I told him I needed to protect money that was mine before the marriage. The lake house from my parents and the cash they left me. He said it could be done. I said it had to be done before October. There is a kind of love that doesn't save you in time. It saves you later, when you've almost forgotten anyone cared. September 5th, 1998. I told Gerald I know. I didn't say what. Just those two words. I know. He turned white. He left the room. He didn't ask me what I meant. That told me everything. You don't leave a room unless you're afraid of what comes next. I closed the journal. She had confronted him. Not with accusations, not with lawyers, but with two words. And he had answered by walking away. I didn't read the rest that night. My mother had written this while cancer ate through her body, while her husband walked through the same house pretending nothing was wrong, while her 8-year-old daughter slept down the hall. She had seen what I couldn't name yet, and she had started counting the days, not hers, but mine. I've worked in accounting long enough to know that numbers don't lie. People lie. Numbers just sit there and wait. Monday morning. I called the only estate attorney in the next town over, a man named Paul Renner, with a small office above a hardware store and a reputation for not taking nonsense. By 10 a.m. I was sitting across from him with the trust document, the journal, and the notarized letter of instruction laid out on his desk like evidence in a trial that was 27 years overdue. Paul was 52, wire glasses, rolled sleeves. He read every page without speaking. Then he took his glasses off, cleaned them on his tie, and looked at me. Irrevocable trust, funded with the grantor's separate property, third-party corporate trustee. Your father was never a trustee or beneficiary. He set the document down. This is bulletproof. And the money? $340,000 in 1998, invested conservatively. Bonds, certificates of deposit. With compound interest over 27 years, you're looking at $950,000 to just over $1 million, plus the lake house property, appraised around $280,000. I let that number sit in the room. Your father knew this existed, Paul said. Your mother's journal makes that clear, and he never told you, never notified the beneficiary. He paused. That's fraud. What do I do? We notify the trust company. They've been managing these assets for 27 years, sending annual reports to the original attorney's firm. The attorney passed away in 2011, but the firm archived the file. The trust company was doing its job. Your father simply never told you it was there. And my siblings? Paul asked if my siblings knew about the trust. I said no. He said, they will. Paul looked at me over his glasses. Miss Sinclair, your mother was a very smart woman. I said, I know. I just didn't know how smart until 2 nights ago. I could tell you about 22 years in detail, but you don't have 22 years. So here it is in 6 minutes. I was 13. March of 2003. I told my English teacher, Mrs. Langford, during office hours. She closed her door and she listened, and then she called Child Protective Services because that was her legal obligation and also because she was a decent human being. CPS investigated. My father denied everything. Keith, 18 then, already wearing the family spokesman hat, told the investigator I was going through a phase after losing my mother. Bryn, 16, cried and said, "Please don't break up our family." Todd was 10. He just stood in the hallway and watched. Insufficient evidence. Case closed. That same week, my father sat at the kitchen table and rewrote his will in front of all of us. Pen and paper, like a man signing a declaration. "This is what happens when you betray your family," he said. My name came off the page like it had never been there. I moved in with my grandmother, my mother's mother, June Mercer, in the next county. She didn't ask me to explain. She just made up the spare room and said, "Stay as long as you need." She died in 2009. I'd been on my own since. In my experience, people who say family comes first usually mean your silence comes first. I put myself through community college, then state university, Then got my CPA. I sent Christmas cards to my siblings every year for 14 years. Not one response. I stopped at year 14. That's a lot of stamps for nothing. I built a life. It was small and quiet and entirely mine. I had a job, a cat, a few people who knew the real story. I didn't talk about my family. I didn't need to. And then my father died, and the quiet ended. Thursday morning, 9 a.m. The kind of fluorescent lighting that makes everyone look guilty. The office of Alan Harmon, attorney at law, was on the second floor of a brick building on Main Street. Wood paneling, framed diplomas, a coffee machine that had been old when Reagan was president. Harmon had been Gerald Sinclair's lawyer for 15 years. Keith, Bryn, and Todd were already seated when I walked in with Paul Renner at my side. Paul carried a leather briefcase, and the kind of calm that unnerves people who are used to being the loudest in the room. Keith stood up. "Who the hell is he?" "My attorney," I said. "You're not in the will." Keith looked at Paul, then back at me. "What do you need an attorney for?" "Sit down, Keith," I said. He didn't, but he stopped talking, which was close enough. Bryn leaned toward Todd. "This is a family matter," she said, loud enough for the room. "Yes," I said. "It is. Let me tell you something about silence in a small town. It's never really silence. It's just everyone agreeing not to say the thing out loud. In that room, the thing no one was saying could have filled the building." Mr. Harmon cleared his throat and began reading. Gerald Sinclair's last will and testament. Everything divided equally among his 3 children, Keith Allen Sinclair, Bryn Elaine Sinclair Osborne, and Todd Michael Sinclair. The house, the savings, approximately $420,000 total, split 3 ways. Willa Sinclair was not mentioned. Keith leaned back and smiled, the satisfied look of a man who believes the world has confirmed his version of events. Bryn nodded slowly. Todd looked at his shoes. Mr. Harmon closed the folder, and then Paul Renner opened his briefcase. "If you've made it this far, I'm glad you're here. Most people scroll past, but you stayed, and that tells me something about you. If you haven't yet, please hit that subscribe button. And if this story reminds you of someone who needs to hear it, share it." Paul didn't stand up. He didn't need to. His voice filled the room the way truth does, without asking permission. "Before we conclude," Paul said, placing a certified document on the table, "I need to make you all aware of a separate estate matter." Keith's smile slipped. Bryn stopped folding her tissue. Elaine Harper Sinclair established an irrevocable trust on August 15, 1998, using her separate property, assets she inherited from her own family prior to marriage. The trust was funded with the lakefront property at Lot 7, Cedar Lake, and $340,000 in cash. Nobody moved. "The sole beneficiary of this trust," Paul continued, "is Willa Elaine Sinclair." Todd's mouth opened. No sound came out. "The trust has been administered by Lakeview Fiduciary Services since 1998. They've managed the investments, maintained the property, and generated annual reports for 27 years. The current estimated value, including the real estate, is approximately $1.2 million. The room went so quiet I could hear the fluorescent light buzzing above us. Keith was the first to speak. "That's bullshit." "Bryn. What are you talking about?" Todd just stared at the document on the table like it was something alive. Paul continued, steady as a metronome. "Gerald Sinclair was aware of this trust's existence. He was not a trustee. He was not a beneficiary. He had no legal authority over these assets. His failure to disclose the trust to its beneficiary over a period of 27 years constitutes fraud under estate law." Mr. Harmon, Gerald's own attorney, sat very still, then said quietly, "I was not aware of this trust." "No," Paul said. "You weren't. Neither was my client. That was the point. For 27 years, my father had hidden my mother's last act of love. And now, in a room with bad lighting and bitter coffee, the secret was out." Keith's face did something I'd never seen before. It rearranged itself from smug to scared in under 3 seconds. He shoved back from the table. "This is a con. She put this together." He jabbed a finger toward me. "She's always been a manipulator." Paul didn't blink. The documents are certified by the trustee and on file with the county recorder's office. Your mother established this trust with the assistance of an independent attorney, Richard Pruitt, who is now deceased but whose firm still holds the original paperwork. These are not allegations. This is fact. Keith turned to Mr. Harmon. You're going to let this stand? Harmon spread his hands. I only handled your father's estate, Keith. I had no knowledge of your mother's separate trust. This is an independent legal instrument. Bryn had both hands flat on the table like she was trying to keep it from floating away. She wouldn't have left everything to just one of us. I spoke for the first time since Paul had started. She didn't leave everything. She left her separate property, to me. The house you grew up in, the savings. That's Dad's estate. That's yours. All three of you. I'm not touching it. Why you? Keith's voice cracked on the second word. Why not all of us? I could have answered. The journal explained it clearly. But some questions answer themselves if you let them sit long enough. And Keith, for once, needed to sit in the silence he'd forced me into for 22 years. I said nothing. Todd looked at me across the table. He wasn't angry. He was doing the math. The same math I'd done in the motel room. If Mom set this up for Willa before she died, then Mom knew something. And if Mom knew... He didn't finish the thought. He didn't have to. Keith asked why me. He'd know soon enough. Bryn cried the way a dam breaks, all at once and in the wrong direction. She'd been holding it since Paul started talking, and now it came. The kind of crying that's less about sadness and more about the sound a person makes when the floor disappears. So Mom knew, she said. Her voice was high and thin. She knew and she didn't tell us? She didn't protect... She stopped, mid-sentence, like she'd run into a wall she'd built herself. She didn't protect... The words came slower now. You? No, I said. She didn't. She was dying, Bryn. She had ovarian cancer. Stage 4. She had weeks. She couldn't protect me, and she couldn't fight him, and she couldn't survive long enough to see a courtroom. I kept my voice level. So she did the one thing she could. She put money aside, and she wrote it all down. Bryn's mascara had reached her chin. I didn't know. I swear, Willa, I didn't know. You didn't want to know. That's different. The room held its breath. Todd, quiet Todd, spoke for the first time since the trust was announced. Is this why Dad never talked about Mom's family? Why we never went to the lake house? Yes. And the trust? She made it because she knew what he did to you? Yes. Todd leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling the way men do when they're trying not to fall apart in public. Bryn whispered, Willa, I'm sorry. I let the words sit on the table between us. Sorry. 4 letters. 22 years late. I heard you, I said. But sorry is a word, Bryn. It took you 22 years to find it. I'm going to need more than a word. She nodded. She didn't argue. That was new. Sorry. I let it sit there like a check I wasn't sure would clear. Some men, when they lose, go quiet. Keith was not that kind of man. He stood in the doorway of the law office with his truck keys in his hand, his face red from the jawline up, and said the thing I knew he'd say because Keith had never once surprised me. I'm going to fight this. She manipulated Mom on her deathbed. I'll hire my own lawyer and I'll tear that trust apart. Paul didn't look up from the documents he was organizing. That's your right. But I should tell you, an irrevocable trust funded with separate property, administered by a corporate trustee for 27 years, with a notarized letter of instruction and a certified paper trail, is one of the strongest legal instruments in estate law. Contesting it would be expensive and almost certainly unsuccessful. Keith turned to me. You always had to win, didn't you? I didn't win anything, Keith. Mom gave it to me. There's a difference. She was dying. She was on drugs. She didn't know what she was signing. She had ovarian cancer, Keith, not dementia. She hired her own attorney. She signed in front of a notary and 2 witnesses. Her mind was the last thing to go. He stared at me, the way he'd been staring at me since I was 13, like I was a problem he could solve by looking at it hard enough. You turned her against us, he said. I was 8. There is a kind of anger that isn't about what you've lost. It's about what you've been caught hiding. Keith wasn't angry about the money. He was angry that the money proved something he'd spent 22 years denying. If Mom believed Willa enough to set aside her entire inheritance for her, then maybe Willa had been telling the truth all along. He stormed out. He left the door open behind him. I didn't close it. That was his mess too. Todd caught up with me between a minivan and a pickup truck, which felt about right. He was always in between things. Willa? Wait. I stopped. Paul nodded and walked ahead to his car, giving us the kind of space that good lawyers know when to give. Todd stood with his hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched, looking more like the 10-year-old I remembered than the 32-year-old standing in front of me. I was 10, he said. When it happened. I didn't understand. Dad just said you were angry and you made something up for attention because Mom died. I believed him because he was Dad. I know. I should have asked you. When I got older, I should have called. You should have. He winced. I didn't soften it for him. I'd spent 22 years being soft on the people who should have been soft on me, and it hadn't changed a thing. I don't hold it against the 10-year-old, I said. I hold it against the 25-year-old who still didn't pick up the phone. He nodded. He took it. That counted for something. Can I? He swallowed. Can I read Mom's journal? Someday? I looked at him for a long time. I saw traces of our mother in his face, the jaw, the way his eyes moved when he was thinking. Not yet, I said. Okay. But you asked. That matters. He almost smiled. It didn't quite land, but the attempt was honest. Willa, for what it's worth. He stopped, started again. I'm sorry I was too young and then too old to ask the right questions. That's the most honest thing anyone in this family has ever said to me. He walked back toward the building. I watched him go and thought, maybe, but not today. Todd was the only one who asked about the journal. I remembered that later. That night, in the motel room with the thin walls and the humming ice machine, my mother spoke to me from 27 years away. I'd been rationing the journal, a few pages at a time, the way you ration water when you don't know how long the walk is. But that night, after the will reading, after Keith's face and Bryn's tears and Todd's quiet apology, I needed her voice. September 3rd, 1998. I'm leaving everything I have to Willa, not because I love her more, but because Gerald will make sure she gets nothing else. The others will have him. They will have the house, the holidays, the family name. She will have no one. This is all I can give her. I read it twice. Then I pressed the journal against my chest and stared at the water stain on the ceiling. September 10th, 1998. I asked Margaret Calloway to hold the envelope. She cried when I told her why. She promised. I believe her. Margaret is the kind of woman who keeps promises even when they cost her something. I need that kind of woman now. September 15th, 1998. I told Gerald I know. I didn't say what I know. Just, I know. He went white. He left the room without a word. He didn't ask what I meant. That was all the confirmation I needed. A man with nothing to hide asks questions. Gerald didn't ask a single one. My mother, dying of cancer, weighing 98 pounds, sitting across from the man who hurt her daughter and saying 2 words that made him walk out of the room. If you've stayed with me this far, I think you already know what was in that envelope. But the last page? That's the one that changed everything. I wasn't ready for it yet. I was saving it the way you save the last chapter of a book that made you feel less alone. I turned off the lamp. In the dark, I could almost hear her pen scratching across the page. Keith called at 6 in the morning. He'd always confused urgency with authority. You're not getting that money, he said. No good morning. Mom was sick. She wasn't thinking straight. I'll prove it. I was already dressed, sitting at the motel desk with my coffee and a legal pad, where I'd written a list of things I needed to do. Talk to trust company, get property appraised, call my office. The list was orderly. My mornings always were. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, Keith, not dementia. She hired her own attorney, in a different town, with her own money. She signed in front of a notary and 2 witnesses. She was thinking straighter than any of us. You turned her against this family. Keith, I was 8 years old. Silence. You can believe whatever you need to believe, I said. But that trust was reviewed by a corporate fiduciary for 27 years. It's not going away because you're angry. He hung up. I finished my coffee. Let me tell you how to recognize a man who's lost control. He doesn't go quiet. He gets louder. He starts sentences with "I'll" and "you can't." He confuses volume with power. Keith had been the loudest person in every room since he was 18 years old. It had worked on our father's friends, on his coworkers, on Bryn and Todd. It had never worked on me. Paul called at 9. The trust company had confirmed everything. 27 years of quarterly reports, investment statements, property tax payments, all on file. The original attorney's firm had archived the records when Richard Pruitt passed in 2011, but Lakeview Fiduciary Services had never stopped managing the assets. Keith can spend $50,000 on a lawyer and lose, Paul said. Or he can accept reality. He'll spend the money, I said. He'd rather be broke and right than solvent and wrong. Paul laughed. I wasn't joking. Bryn knocked on my motel room door at 8 o'clock on a Friday evening, which meant she'd been driving in circles for at least an hour trying to decide. I opened the door. She stood there in jeans and a sweater, no makeup, which for Bryn was the equivalent of showing up naked. Can I come in? I stepped aside. She sat on the plastic chair by the window. I sat on the bed. Two sisters in a motel room that smelled like industrial cleaner and regret. I've been thinking since Thursday, she said. I keep replaying everything, all the years. I waited. I knew something was wrong. She looked at her hands. I think I always knew, but if I said it out loud, then I'd have to do something about it. And I was 16, and I was scared, and he was Dad, and you were the little sister, and I just... She pressed her fingers against her eyes. I just didn't. I was 13, I said. And I was scared too. The difference is I still said it. She flinched. I didn't apologize for the flinch. I teach second graders, Willa, 7-year-olds. If one of my students came to me and said what you said, I would believe them, immediately. I would call the authorities that same hour. She stopped. And yet my own sister. She couldn't finish. She didn't need to. I know, I said. We sat in the quiet for a while. The ice machine hummed. A car door slammed in the parking lot. I don't expect you to forgive me, Bryn said. Good, because I'm not ready. She nodded. She didn't cry this time. That was progress. Hers, not mine. She left at 9. We didn't hug, but she looked at me before she closed the door, and for the first time in 22 years, she saw me. Not the story Dad told, not the cautionary tale. Me. The lake house was exactly where she said it would be. Lot 7, Cedar Lake, like a pin dropped on a map 27 years ago and never moved. I drove 45 minutes on Saturday morning through 2-lane roads lined with birch trees that were just starting to turn. Paul had arranged for the trust company to send a key. The property manager, a retired woman named Doris who lived 3 lots over, had been maintaining the exterior for years. She waved from her porch as I pulled in. The house was small, built in the early 60s by my grandparents, my mother's parents, as a summer place. Cedar siding, green trim, a screened porch facing the water. The paint was tired, but the bones were good. I unlocked the front door. The air inside was still and cool, the way air gets in houses where nobody lives but somebody cares. Lakeview Fiduciary Services had paid Doris to keep the pipes from freezing and the roof from leaking. They'd done their job. On the mantel above the stone fireplace, 2 framed photographs. My mother as a young woman, standing on this same porch, squinting into the sun. My grandmother in a garden hat, laughing. Nobody had stood in this room in 27 years. I walked through the kitchen. 2 bedrooms, a bathroom with a clawfoot tub, a closet with moth-eaten towels. Everything was old and clean and patient. I sat on the porch and looked at the lake. October light came through the trees in long, low shafts. The water was dark green and absolutely still. This was hers. And now it was mine. And she had made sure of that while she was counting the days she had left, while cancer ate through her body, while her husband walked through their house pretending the world was fine. I brought the journal with me. I hadn't read the last page yet. I was saving it. I opened the last page the way you open a door you've been standing in front of for 27 years. I was sitting on the porch. The lake was still. The trees were doing that thing they do in early October, burning from the edges inward, like they're making up their minds. October 2nd, 1998. I have maybe 2 weeks. I can feel it. The pain has a shape now and it's bigger than me. Willa, if you're reading this, it means he's gone and you survived. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. I should have left him sooner. I'm sorry, but I need you to know. I believed you before you ever said a word. A mother knows. I watched you change, and I knew what changed you, and I will carry that failure to my grave. I should have stopped it. I should have taken you and driven through the night and never looked back. I didn't. I was sick, and I was scared, and I was wrong. I set this aside for you because you will need it. Not the money, the proof. The proof that someone saw you, that someone chose you. I chose you. I choose you. Always. Mom. I closed the journal. I held it against my chest with both arms, the way you hold a child. My mother's handwriting. My mother's voice. She couldn't save me while she was alive. So she saved me from the grave. That's the kind of mother mine was. I cried the way I hadn't cried since I was 8 years old, loud and open and ugly and free. The lake didn't care, the trees didn't care, nobody was watching. For once, nobody was watching, and I could fall apart without anyone turning it into evidence that I was unstable. There is a kind of proof that has nothing to do with courts or evidence or witnesses. It's the proof that someone saw you when you were invisible. That's worth more than any inheritance. I cried until the lake went dark. And then I stopped. And then I knew what to do. We're almost at the end, and I want to pause for just a moment. If this story has meant something to you, please take 5 seconds, like, subscribe, or share it with someone who needs to hear it. 97% of people who watch never do. But you're still here, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you. I called Paul from the porch of the lake house. The reception was bad. The decision was clear. I want to claim the trust, I said. All of it. And I want to donate $100,000 to a child abuse prevention organization. Paul was quiet for a moment. Which one? I'll find one that works in small towns, rural places, where people don't report because everyone knows everyone and nobody wants to make a scene. I'll start the transfer paperwork this week, he said. The trust company is cooperating fully. They've been waiting for a valid claim for years. And Keith? His lawyer reviewed the trust documents yesterday. I got a call this morning. They're not contesting. I let that settle. He backed down? Cost of contesting outweighed the likely outcome. An irrevocable trust with a corporate trustee and 27 years of clean administration. No judge in the state would overturn it. Keith backed down. Not because he believed me, because it was cheaper to stop fighting. In my family, that counted as growth. I sat on the porch steps and watched a heron cross the lake, low and slow. The air smelled like pine needles and wet earth. My father had left his estate to his 3 loyal children. Loyal. That's a word that does a lot of heavy lifting in a family like mine. He'd left them a house and some savings, about $140,000 each. And my mother, from her separate inheritance, from the family she'd come from before she ever met Gerald Sinclair, had left me everything she had. I didn't feel victorious. I felt the way you feel when you've been holding your breath for years and finally exhale. Not happy, not sad, just finished. Except I wasn't. There was one more thing I needed to do. They came. All 3 of them. I hadn't expected that. I invited them to the lake house. Not a summons, not a demand. A phone call. I have something to show you. You don't have to come. Keith came because he wanted to see the property. Bryn came because of the guilt. Todd came because he was Todd. The living room was small. Stone fireplace, 2 windows, afternoon light falling across a braided rug. Keith stood by the mantel with his arms crossed. Bryn sat on the old couch. Todd leaned against the window frame. I stood in the center of the room with the journal in my hands. I didn't ask you here to punish you, I said. I asked you here because you should know the truth. Not Dad's version, not the town's version, not the version you told yourselves for 22 years to sleep at night. Keith shifted his weight. Bryn pressed her lips together. Mom saw what happened to me. She wrote it down. She named what she saw in a way that no one could pretend it was something else. and then she made sure that when he was gone, I would know she believed me. I'm not going to read you the whole journal. Most of it is between her and me, but I'm going to read you the last page. I paused. Because you need to hear what your mother said about your father, in her own handwriting, 2 weeks before she died. Keith stared at the fireplace. Bryn gripped her knees. Todd looked at me and nodded. A small, steady nod, like a man bracing for something he knows is coming. I held the journal open. I want you to hear this the way I heard it. And I began to read. I read my mother's last words aloud in the house she grew up in, 27 years after she wrote them. October 2nd, 1998. I have maybe 2 weeks. I can feel it. My voice was steady. I'd practiced this, not out loud but in my head, over and over, the way you rehearse something that has to land exactly right. Willa, if you're reading this, it means he's gone and you survived. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. I should have left him sooner. I'm sorry. Todd was crying, quiet tears, the kind that roll without permission. But I need you to know, I believed you before you ever said a word. A mother knows. Bryn had both hands over her mouth. Her eyes were wide and wet and old. I watched you change, and I knew what changed you, and I will carry that failure to my grave. Keith was looking at the floor. His jaw was tight. His arms were no longer crossed. They hung at his sides like they didn't know where to go. I set this aside for you because you will need it. Not the money, the proof. The proof that someone saw you, that someone chose you. I chose you. I choose you. Always. Mom. Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. The kind that fills itself. Nobody spoke for a long time. A full minute. Maybe 2. The lake made small sounds through the window screens. Keith, finally, very quietly. Did she say anything about us? I closed the journal. She loved all of you. Every entry mentions you by name. She loved you. But she knew who was going to need help. I looked at him. And she was right. People think forgiveness is a gift you give others. It's not. It's a door you open when you're ready. I wasn't opening it that day, but I was looking at the handle. Keith walked outside the way men walk when they've run out of arguments, slowly, with their hands in their pockets. I followed him. Not to comfort him. I had comforted enough people in this family. I followed him because there was one more thing, and it needed to be said where the others couldn't hear. He stood by his truck, looking at the lake. His back was to me. I was 18, he said, without turning around. He told me you were lying. I believed him because... He stopped. Because believing you meant your father was a monster, I said. I know. It was easier to lose a sister than a father. He turned around. His eyes were red, but he wasn't crying. Keith didn't cry. He just corroded from the inside. I'm sorry, he said. You told everyone I made my bed. For 22 years, Keith. Every Thanksgiving I wasn't invited to. Every Christmas. Every time someone in this town asked about me and you said, she has issues. You didn't just not believe me. You made sure nobody else did either. He flinched. I know, he said. Sorry doesn't undo 22 years of that. I know. But I heard you. He looked at me, really looked, the way he might have looked at me in 2003 if he'd been a different kind of brother. The kind who asks questions before choosing sides. He wasn't that brother. He might never be. But standing by his truck at the lake house that my mother had saved for me, Keith Sinclair looked, for the first time, like a man who understood the size of what he'd done. He got in his truck. He drove away without another word. I didn't wave, but I didn't close the door either. Everyone else left. Todd stayed on the porch like he was waiting for permission to exist. Bryn had gone first, a small wave from the passenger window of Keith's truck. Not friendly, not unfriendly, just an acknowledgement that something had shifted and she hadn't figured out what to do with it yet. Todd leaned against the porch railing. The light was going amber. The lake was turning gold. Can I come back? He asked. To see the house? You can. Not right away, but eventually. He nodded. I want to read the journal, when you're ready to share it. I'll think about it. We stood there. 2 siblings on a porch that belonged to a mother they'd both lost. Me at 8, him in a different way. Slower. The kind of loss that happens when someone rewrites the story so many times you forget there was an original. I'm sorry I was too young and then too old to ask the right questions, he said. You said that already. I know. I mean it more now. I almost smiled. You named your cat Margin, he said. I heard you mention it at the wake. That's the most accountant thing I've ever heard. She's named after the place where the important notes go. He laughed, a short, surprised sound, like he'd forgotten that was something we could do. Laugh. In the same space, like people who shared blood and history, and a mother who'd loved them both. Go home, Todd. Yeah. He pushed off the railing. Okay. He walked to Bryn's car. Halfway across the yard, he turned back. Willa? Yeah? I'm glad you came back. He drove away with Bryn. I stood on the porch alone. But for the first time in 22 years, alone didn't mean forgotten. The paperwork took 2 weeks, 27 years of waiting, 2 weeks of forms. Paul walked me through every signature. Transfer of trust assets, cash holdings of $985,000 after administrative fees, deed to the lakefront property, Lot 7, Cedar Lake, appraised at $283,000. All legal, all clean. 27 years of compound interest on a mother's grief turned into something solid. I sat at Paul's desk and wrote a check for $100,000 payable to Cedar County Children's Alliance, a nonprofit that ran counseling programs and advocacy services for children in rural communities. Small towns. The kind of places where everyone goes to the same church and nobody wants to make a fuss. Paul watched me sign. That's generous. It's not generous, I said. It's necessary. Someone should have done it for me. He didn't argue. Keith did not contest. His attorney confirmed it in writing. No grounds, no case, no action. Keith would receive his share of Gerald's estate, roughly $140,000. And that was that. So would Bryn. So would Todd. My father left his children a house and some money. My mother left me the truth. I knew which one mattered. I packed my bag at the Pinecrest Motor Lodge for the last time. The room looked the same as the day I'd arrived. Thin carpet, duck painting, parking lot view. But I wasn't the same woman who had checked in 10 days ago with a black dress and no expectations. I stood at the window and looked at the town. I didn't come back for this. But I'm not sorry it happened. My mother had planned for 27 years to give me something my father spent 27 years trying to take. Proof that I was seen, that I was believed, that I mattered. I signed the donation check at Paul's desk. He said, "That's generous." I said, "It's necessary. Someone should have done it for me." I didn't tell anyone in town. I didn't have to. Small towns don't need journalists. They have grocery store checkout lines. Within a week, the story had traveled the way stories do in places where people know each other's middle names. Quietly at first, then with momentum. Did you hear about the Sinclair girl? Her mother left her a trust. The one they said was a liar? Apparently not. I didn't engage with it. I didn't correct anyone or give interviews or post anything online. The truth had its own schedule. It always had. On my last full day, I drove to the cemetery. I hadn't visited my mother's grave in years. It was in the town I'd left, and leaving meant leaving everything, even the headstone. The plot was small. Elaine Harper Sinclair, 1962 to 1998. Beloved Mother. Gerald had chosen the inscription, Beloved Mother. He'd gotten that part right at least, even if he'd spent the next 27 years proving he didn't mean it. I laid a bunch of grocery store daisies on the stone. Daisies were her favorite. I remembered that the way you remember things from when you were 8. In flashes, not full sentences. I sat on the grass for an hour. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She'd already said everything in the journal. I was just sitting with her. In my experience, the truth doesn't set you free the way people say it does. It just stops the lying. And sometimes, after 27 years, that's enough. I drove past the family house one last time on my way to the highway. Keith was in the front yard, mowing the lawn. He saw my car. I saw him. Neither of us waved. We looked at each other through the windshield, And for 1 second, we were just two people who had survived the same man. Then I turned onto the highway and didn't look back. The drive home took 6 hours. The longest I'd ever driven toward something instead of away from it. The highway opened up past the county line, 4 lanes, open sky, radio stations that didn't know my family's name. I rolled the windows down even though it was October and too cold for it. I wanted to feel the air. Somewhere around the 3rd hour, I called my friend Delia. She was the kind of friend who didn't ask why you were calling at 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. She just picked up. "It's done," I said. "How do you feel?" I thought about it, really thought about it, the way I rarely let myself think about feelings, because feelings were a luxury I hadn't been able to afford for 22 years. "Like I'm finally caught up on my own story," I said. Delia was quiet for a moment. "Good. Now come home and feed your cat. She's been texting me." "She doesn't have thumbs." "She has attitude. Close enough." I laughed. For the first time in 10 days, an honest laugh, the kind that doesn't check first to see who's watching. I pulled into my apartment complex at 8:30 p.m. Same parking spot. Same stairs. Same door with the slightly crooked number. Margin was on the kitchen table, which she knew she wasn't allowed on, looking at me with the particular disdain of a cat who's been fed by the neighbor and found the experience beneath her. "I'm back," I said. She blinked. Slowly. "Cat 4. I noticed. Don't let it happen again." Everything in the apartment was exactly the way I'd left it, but I wasn't the same person who'd locked the door 10 days ago. I set the journal on the bookshelf next to the photograph of my mother holding me by the lake. 2 things she'd left me. 1 you could hold. 1 you could feel. 3 weeks later, I went back to my spreadsheets. Numbers still didn't lie. And for the first time in a long time, neither did my family. I sat at my desk at Meriden and Hale, same corner cubicle, same fluorescent hum. A coworker asked how my time off was. "Family stuff," I said. She nodded and didn't push. Good coworkers are like good fences. They respect the property line. On Thursday, I called a therapist. Not the one I'd been meaning to call for 3 years. A new one, recommended by Delia. Her name was Dr. Russo, and her first available appointment was in 2 weeks. "I'm not in crisis," I told the receptionist. "I just think it's time." It was. It had been for 22 years. But you don't get to heal on a schedule that makes sense to other people. You heal when the ground under you is finally still enough to stand on. Todd texted me on a Sunday evening. A photo of a sunset over a flat stretch of highway. No words. I sent back a thumbs up. It wasn't much. It was a start. A card arrived from Bryn the following week. Plain white envelope, her teacher's handwriting on the front. Inside, a short note. "I started therapy. I thought you should know." I didn't respond yet, but I didn't throw it away. I put it in the drawer with the photograph. Keith. Silence. I accepted it the way I'd accepted everything from Keith, without surprise and without expectation. I called a contractor about the lake house, a man named Walt, who lived in the next town over and came recommended by Doris, the property manager. "How much work does it need?" I asked. He said, "It needs love." I said, "I have time." Todd sent a sunset. Bryn sent a card. Keith sent nothing. I was okay with all 3. I wrote the letter by hand. I'm an accountant. I type everything. But this one deserved ink. I sat at my kitchen table on a Saturday morning with a cup of coffee and a sheet of good stationery. The kind you buy at a bookshop and never use because the occasion never seems right. This was the occasion. Dear Mrs. Calloway, 27 years is a long time to keep a promise. Most people don't keep promises for 27 days. You kept one for a woman who couldn't watch you do it. You held that envelope through moves and holidays and years that turned into decades, and when the time came, you found me. You didn't have to. Nobody would have known if you hadn't. But you did. I want you to know it mattered. All of it. The envelope, the journal, the trust. The fact that my mother trusted you and you were worthy of it. I'm going to fix up the lake house. I'm going to plant daisies in the front yard because my mother liked them. And I'm going to put your name on the dedication plaque at a donation I made, if you'll let me. You deserve to be remembered for this. Thank you, Margaret, for carrying what must have been so heavy for so long. Willa Sinclair. I folded the letter. I addressed the envelope. I walked to the post office 2 blocks from my apartment and dropped it in the mailbox. My mother couldn't save me, but she knew someone who would carry the weight until it was time to put it down. And Margaret had. For 27 years. Without recognition, without payment, without anyone knowing. She did it because she'd promised a dying woman, and Margaret Calloway was the kind of person who meant it when she said yes. I mailed it on a Tuesday, and then I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table and did something I hadn't done in 27 years. I felt safe. Come back tomorrow. I'll leave the porch light on. The lake house was finished in April. Fresh paint, sage green, the color it had been when my mother was young. New screens on the porch, the floorboards sanded and sealed, the same view my grandmother had loved, and her daughter after her, and now me. I drove up on a Saturday morning with Margin in a carrier on the passenger seat. She complained the entire 45 minutes. I told her she was being dramatic. She disagreed. The contractor, Walt, had left the keys under the mat and a note. "Looks good. Your mom would be proud." He'd never met my mother. But I think he was right. I set Margin down on the porch. She walked the perimeter, sniffed every corner, and then sat in a patch of sunlight like she'd always lived there. Cats are good at that, claiming a place as theirs without needing anyone's permission. I made coffee in the kitchen. The water from the well tasted like iron and cold rock. I carried the mug to the porch and sat in the chair I'd bought from a second-hand shop in town. A wide Adirondack, painted white, the kind you can fall asleep in without meaning to. The lake was still. The birch trees had come back green. Somewhere, a loon called. I didn't come back for the inheritance. I came back because my mother asked me to be the kind of woman who finishes things. And I finished it. My father left his children a house and some money. My mother left me the truth. I'll take the truth. I kept the journal. I read it sometimes, when the evenings are long and the water is still. She's there, in every page, still choosing me. 22 years is a long time to be wrong about someone, but it's longer when you chose to be. If you're still here, thank you. You sat with me through the whole thing, and that's no small thing. I'll be back tomorrow with another story. Sit with me again next time. There's more tea in the pot. Thank you for listening. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment. Tell me what you would have done. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, well, the porch light's always on. See you next time.